Andrew Goldsworthy is a British sculptor. I'm sure some of you are familiar with his work. He uses, more often than not, natural objects to create these absolutely wonderful, absolutely temporary pieces. He does things like spend a day on the northern coast in England gathering 400, 500, 600, 700 pieces of driftwood, and then arranging them in a beautiful sculpture that he places directly in the path of the incoming tide. And then the ocean dismantles this incredible piece of art that he's put together. His art is fleeting. It is gone in the beholding. Kelly and I watched a documentary about him probably 3 or 4 years ago, and though I have seen at least 24 movies since then, this is the one that sticks in my head. I can't forget it. It rings out. My favorite piece was one in which he spent days in the woods during the height of color season. He collected the most beautiful leaves he could find. He would discard hundreds of leaves to find one that retained the perfect shade of green. He'd dig through a pile of thousands of leaves and pull out the one that burnt with the red of fire. Then he took all of these leaves into his workshop, and he sewed them together with a piece of fishing line, a piece of invisible string, meticulously. He did this with great care for the arrangement, each leaf carefully placed next to the next one according to its color and its shape. And the strand then, about 50 feet long, was this amazing thing to behold. He then took this piece he'd assembled, and he returned to the woods, and he found a dramatic bend in a perfect little creek, a place where the flow of water shifted at nearly a 90-degree angle. He walked about 400 yards upstream and carefully set this strand of leaves in the river. Then he raced to the bend, and waited until his ideal strand of ideal leaves floated into and through this ideal bend in the river. It's one of the most beautiful works of art I have ever seen, and it existed for less than 30 seconds, and then it vanished. I went for a run last week. On Cleveland Street, south of Armitage, the trees, at least on Monday, were still thick enough to form a canopy. The sun was out, and it was hot for a fall day, but the leaves made a shield of at least 100 colors, each leaf refracting the sun, the leaves combining to form this multi-hued prism. The street bathed in endless shades of red, green, orange, and I was kept cool by the cover, nature protecting us from nature, right in the heart of the city. The juxtaposition nearly undid me. The beauty of the moment nearly blinded me. And then a car horn honked, and the smell of exhaust was in my nose, and I was suddenly on North Avenue in front of a Quiznos. The moment, transcendent as it was gone, vanished. The love that simultaneously holds this world together and absolutely transcends it comes to us in many guises, and all of them are fleeting. God cannot be put away for later. He comes and then he goes. Or as Ronald Getz put it, we cannot manage grace. We can only hope that it will be there for us when we need it. When I first saw Andy Goldsworthy's work, it hurt to see such beauty disappear. It was evocative, it was painful. And so I thought that the work's power lay in its perversity. Here, gone, present, absent, the art existing really only in the dialectic. But I've come to suspect that what is really happening in this artist's work is much less pretentious than that. Goldsworthy's art mirrors existence. It doesn't make a statement. Those leaves floating down the river speak the truth of existence. On this side of paradise, wonder, love, beauty, these things are momentary and they are fragile. Brilliance comes and then it goes. which suggests that it could be the very impermanence of wonder that makes it invaluable. After all, if that strand of leaves ran down that river in a perpetual loop, who would care? It'd be less than decoration. Without its evanescence, this work would be meaningless. It could be then the fragility of love that makes it so remarkable, the unpredictability of God that makes us rejoice whenever she surprises us, absent, present, gone, here. The early Christian theologian Athanasius said something that I want to share with you that actually someone shared with me in the handshake line last week, and it is one of the most brilliant theological concepts I've ever heard in my life. Are you on the edge of your seat? I hope you are, because it really is a remarkable thing. Here's what Athanasius said. More often than not, our experience of God is like walking into a room the moment after God has stepped out. We get the glimmer, the sense, the scent, the aura, but not the presence. Our experience of God is like stepping into a room the instant after God has stepped out. We get the glimmer, the sense, the scent, the aura, but not the presence. We rarely get the presence, as Shirley just said, and when we do, it tends to disappear. After the crucifixion, Cleopas and his friend could have walked home in isolation, but they didn't. And in the story that unfolds from that choice, we get, as Shirley said, a blueprint for how to sustain God's fleeting presence in our lives. They could have walked home by themselves. That's the human thing to do. When you are disappointed or stung by pain, you do what an animal does. Our dog's been sick at home. When she's sick, she does not want to come run and jump into our bed and be comforted. She wants to go off in a corner all by herself. And that is what we want to do. When you're hurt, you withdraw. You isolate. But these two found some kind of deeper wisdom. Instead of just walking along on their own, just their pain, just their thoughts, just their cell phones, until eventually, as they started to get home, everyday trivia trumped the pain that they were in, and they wondered, did the kids remember to walk the dog while I was gone? Did I pay the phone bill before I left? How many emails are waiting in the office? Just these two people walking down the road, lost in their own thoughts. They didn't do that. They went to each other. They talked to one another about the pain they were in, about the pain of Christ's failure, and about their shared memory of his presence. And it wasn't so much that their conversation sustained Christ's presence as it sustained the ache, the longing, the need for him, the need for God. Most of us are not here this morning because we are absolutely confident of God's presence in our lives. No, most of us are here because at some level or another we have been unsettled by God's absence. And so we come to church searching. In a congregation home to such a wide variety of religious experience and background and opinion, the greatest thing we hold in common may well be this shared longing for the divine. And there may be no better thing than bringing that longing into this room. There may be no better thing than you can bring. For if you don't bring your longing into the sanctuary, if you remain on the doorstep convinced that this place is only home for those who are satisfied, convinced that only the well-fed are welcome in this room and not the hungry, your desire for God eventually will collapse under its own weight. It cannot be sustained all on your own. I spent more than a decade away from church, and I left convinced that I would be able to find God anywhere but the church. But after a while, as the years rolled by, what I found instead was that that my longing for God simply disappeared and was replaced by thinner, more insubstantial desires, a new television, more money. There are easier things to long for than the presence of God. But here, in this place, with others who are also longing for God, our longing as individuals can be sustained. You are not the only one sitting in the pew waiting for the communion tray to make its way into your hands. Others are waiting with you. You're not the only person here who longs for God to step into your life. Others who are here, we long do. We all do. We ache together and we wait together, and together we sustain the weight, and together we sustain the ache. More than this, though, imagine walking up the flight of stairs to catch the L. And you stand there on the platform, and the platform is empty. You begin to suspect that you've missed the train, or maybe this isn't even a platform after all. What's going on? Nothing's coming. But if the platform is bustling, if you walk up the stairs and there are dozens and dozens of people standing there waiting for the red line, coffee cups in hand, crowded. Some of these potential travelers are so eager to catch the train that they crane their necks to look down the track and see if it's ever going to come and when it's going to come, and it's got to be here any minute now. You know then that your longing and your wait are about to be satisfied. In other words, this place, these people, together we raise the hope of satisfaction. That's what Cleopas and his friend found. True satisfaction. At first they only saw a stranger, but they welcomed him. They were smart. They welcomed the stranger into their midst. And when they did, they started talking. They were open with him. And they talked about the pain that they were in and the longing that they had for God. And then in an instant, this stranger revealed himself to be the very one they were longing for. The very presence of God right there at the table with them. And then right when he broke the bread, as soon as they realized who he was gone. Vanished. Jesus vanished. Their ache was satisfied, their longing rewarded, and then, just as quickly, Jesus vanished. And they were in the room alone again. They had the glimmer, the sense, the aura, the scent, but not the presence. And they have to wonder to themselves, just as you have surely wondered, is that glimmer even real? And now Cleopas and his friend have two choices. They can play it safe. They can go forward from this experience and tell the story of an unusually brutal week during which nothing all of that unusual really happened. Jesus died. Well, people die. And his friends were heartbroken. Well, people have their hearts broken. We suffer disappointment every day. Nothing terribly unusual happened. They could tell their story, that story, and it wouldn't change a thing. Explaining the everyday, even when the everyday is heartbreaking, is just another sort of safe humdrum narrating the possible. Or these two could take a serious risk. They could speak about that brilliant half second, that blink and you would have missed it moment when the God of all that is and was and ever shall be stepped right into their lives to eat dinner with them. Let me tell you that it is easier to long for God than it is to talk about the risen Christ. It is easier to ache for that better realm than to live within those split seconds when that better realm lights up the everyday. It is easier to come home from a run Look your 10-year-old child in the face and say, I spaced out for a moment, ran onto North Avenue, almost got hit by a man in an SUV who probably would have made an obscene gesture at me if the guy from Quiznos wasn't taking a smoke break right in front of the shop. That's an easy story to tell. The hard story is to look a child in the eyes and say, just for a second, I saw God in the way the sunlight came breaking through the autumn leaves, even as they held it back. That's the hard story to tell. You have to take a risk. But which story will remind us that life is good? It is easier to think that your faith is defined by doubt, that your relationship with God is defined by absence. That's easy, especially here in the liberal church when it's practically dogma. It's much easier to sit with that kind of faith than it is to recall Easter Sunday morning. That split second during the service when the brass rang out and the air was full of the scent of lilies and you were suddenly seized by belief and you knew that the tomb was empty. That is risky, to go forward with that kind of story on your lips. And it's essential. Earlier this week, we observed the funeral of a young woman who was confirmed here at St. Paul's in 2012, which suggests just how young she was. She died as a result of risky behavior. She died as a result, I'm sure, of some kind of feeling of meaninglessness and heartbreak. The service was held in the chapel, and Pastor Sarah did an absolutely masterful job of speaking a word of hope and comfort to the people in that room who were just struck raw and down by their pain. And though her words were so comforting and so skillful, there is, of course, no comfort. So I was thinking of that funeral service. It's so heavy, so hard. It'll haunt us, I'm sure, for years, for the rest of our lives. I was thinking about that service as I stood here just moments ago at the 9:30 service, and dozens and dozens and dozens of little children came down the aisle to receive communion. These little boys who'd never received communion before, and I have this loaf that Marcia has baked, and I'm holding it in my hands, and these little boys reach in and they grab about a third of it, just wham! And they go marching toward the grape juice. All of these children, and what it reminded me of is the fact that the story that we are called to tell and hold in our hands here, sometimes it seems as if it's falling right through our fingers like grains of sand. And we have to find a way to hold it and to tell it and to carry it forward. This thing that we've been entrusted with is priceless, and it is such an incredible responsibility, because someday, 20 years from now, when the children who just flocked to our communion table come back to church, right? Or don't even come back, and you bump into one of them, some kid that you knew from St. Paul's, you see him in the grocery store or the coffee shop, and you can tell that this young person is nearly drowned by the values of a culture which is telling them you are what you achieve, and if your achievements are insignificant, then so are you. You are either the sum of your efforts or the sum of your mistakes, one thing or the other. That's who you are. Let me tell you, when you see that young person, head full of Nietzsche, heart full of despair, it will be so much easier to acquiesce, to let God's absence go unchallenged, to mouth the world's story with our silence. That's easy. But we could say, I remember a meal, a moment, a split second when you held a piece of fresh baked grace right in your hands, when you drank a tiny thimble full of love that is deeper than the deepest ocean. I remember that moment when God stepped into the room and called you beloved. beloved, not the product of your efforts, beloved, not the sum of your mistakes, beloved. So do that in Starbucks to some 25-year-old, and they may well think that you've gone around the bend. But which story has the power to save them from the world's lies? We have no choice but to bear witness to those moments when Christ is risen in our lives. For in our telling and retelling, those split seconds can become the thread that sews a lifetime together. And Christ's presence will not fade. Instead, it will come to define us. It is fleeting, of course. God's presence is always fleeting, but it is also forever in the retelling. Amen.